A woman's got no business being here alone. Why don't you run along home, princess? The words, dripping with unearned swagger and the distinct scent of cheap whiskey, cut through the low hum of the roadside diner. The crowd, a mixture of young construction workers and long-haul truckers, erupted in scattered chuckles. They turned to stare, their expressions a blend of second-hand embarrassment and morbid curiosity. The target of the insult, a woman seated by herself in a corner booth, didn't react. She didn't look up. She simply continued to study the contents of her coffee cup, black with no sugar. Her posture radiated a kind of serene detachment. Her hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and she wore a plain navy windbreaker over a gray hoodie and dark jeans, the uniform of deliberate invisibility. Nothing about her screamed for attention. And in this world of loud voices and high-visibility vests, that was apparently unforgivable. The construction worker, a foreman named Derek who'd just closed a lucrative contract and had 3 beers more than his judgment could handle, took her silence as submission. He saw vulnerability, not strength. But when the regional safety director, Marcus Thornton, later reviewed the security footage, he wouldn't see a victim. He would see a predator in perfect stillness, a wolf allowing a coyote to yap at the edge of its territory. And he would recognize the profound, terrifying calm that precedes a reckoning. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, drop a comment below. Derek, emboldened by the complicit silence of his crew, swaggered closer. He was the alpha of this small, grease-stained kingdom, a hero in his own narrative. And this woman was a disruption to his carefully constructed reality. He saw her not as a person, but as an anomaly, an unwelcome variable in the rigid masculine equation of his world. "Hey, I'm talking to you." His voice grew louder, demanding the attention he felt was his birthright. He leaned over her table, invading her space, his shadow falling across her coffee. The air grew thick with the smell of stale alcohol and something else, the acrid stench of unchecked ego. He noticed her hands resting calmly on the laminate tabletop. They weren't delicate or manicured. The knuckles bore faint scars, the nails were trimmed short and functional. These were hands that understood machinery, that could operate complex equipment, that could apply precise force when necessary. But he was too blinded by his own prejudice to read the story they told. He saw only a woman, and in his narrow worldview, that meant she was lesser. The waitress, a tired woman who'd witnessed 1,000 nights like this, made a tentative move to intervene, but a hard look from one of Derek's crew froze her in place. This was their business, the look said, and civilians should stay out of it. So she refilled a coffee pot and watched, a reluctant witness to the unfolding humiliation. The woman finally, slowly, lifted her eyes from her cup. They were the color of winter steel, deep, cold, and unreadable. There was no fear in them. No anger. Only a profound, almost clinical stillness. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for one piercing second. And in that moment, she saw everything, the insecurity masquerading as confidence, the desperate need for approval from the pack, the hollow center of a man who measured his worth by how small he could make others feel. She saw his entire work history in the slump of his shoulders and the defensive set of his jaw. He was a follower, a bully, a liability. And then she looked away, back to her coffee. A dismissal so complete, so utterly definitive that it was more devastating than any verbal response. This enraged him. It was a rejection of his very existence, of his perceived authority. He needed a reaction. He needed to provoke the fear he believed was his right to command. With a grunt of frustration, he shoved her shoulder. It wasn't a violent blow, but it was aggressive, demeaning. It was a physical punctuation to his verbal assault, a final declaration of his dominance. The coffee cup tilted. A few drops splashed onto the table. And still, she did not react. She simply reached out with that same unnerving calm and used a single napkin to blot the spill. Then she carefully repositioned her cup, her movements deliberate and unhurried. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer complicit. It was confused. The coyote had snapped, and the wolf hadn't even bothered to bare its teeth. The tension in the room coiled tight, and everyone felt it. Something was fundamentally wrong with this picture. The predictable script of workplace bullying had been torn up, and no one, least of all Derek, knew the new lines. His bravado began to urdle into a sour mixture of confusion and a nascent, terrifying suspicion that he had just made the single greatest mistake of his entire life. He had mistaken stillness for weakness and silence for surrender. He had failed to understand that in the world of true professionals, the most dangerous people are the ones who have nothing to prove. They don't raise their voices because their voice can reshape entire industries. They don't threaten because their actions are the only threat that matters. He had just pushed a woman who commanded operations across 6 states, a woman whose name was spoken in hushed, respectful tones in corporate boardrooms and federal regulatory offices. He had just laid his hands on Dr. Sarah Chen, director of the National Transportation Safety Board, and the universe was about to correct his error with surgical precision. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, subscribe to The Final Watch. Your support keeps these stories coming. The moment stretched thin, humming with unspoken tension. Then it shattered, not with a shout, but with a series of sharp, urgent tones from the emergency broadcast system cutting through the diner's ambient noise. Every worker in the room instinctively froze, their heads snapping toward the television mounted above the counter. The local news was interrupted by a breaking alert. The screen flashed a stark red banner: transportation emergency, bridge collapse, Highway 87, multiple casualties reported. A map appeared, showing the interstate. A section of the newly constructed Riverside Bridge, a massive infrastructure project that had just opened 3 weeks ago, had suffered a catastrophic structural failure during rush hour. Red icons marked the location. The crawl at the bottom of the screen listed preliminary reports: multiple vehicles in the water, unknown number of casualties, emergency services overwhelmed. A panicked reporter began speaking in rushed, breathless tones about structural integrity failures, vehicles submerged in the river below, and the complete breakdown of communication with first responders on scene. For the men in the diner, this wasn't abstract news. Some of them had worked on that very bridge. They had friends, colleagues, former crew members who might have been crossing at that exact moment. The atmosphere shifted instantly from drunken antagonism to sober professional dread. Derek, his petty conflict momentarily forgotten, began to hold forth loudly. They need to shut down all river access. Standard procedure, he declared, speaking to his crew but loud enough for the whole diner to hear. Cordon the area, redirect traffic through the valley route. Another worker chimed in. Nah, man. You gotta get cranes in there immediately. Pull those vehicles out before they sink deeper. They argued, their voices filled with the confident theoretical knowledge of men who had read the manuals but never managed a disaster. They were playing checkers while a grandmaster was about to play chess. Dr. Chen, meanwhile, moved with an economy of motion that was breathtaking in its efficiency. She slid out of her booth, her previous stillness replaced by fluid, purposeful grace. She bypassed the arguing workers without a glance, her focus absolute. She walked to the payphone alcove in the back, a relic the diner kept functional, but instead of using the old phone, she produced something from inside her windbreaker that made the waitress's eyes widen. A compact, military-grade encrypted satellite phone. Matte black, utterly out of place in this roadside establishment. She didn't fumble with it. Her fingers moved with the practiced familiarity of a surgeon selecting an instrument. With a press of a button, a small antenna extended. She held it to her ear, her other hand resting flat against the wall, a point of anchor in a world tipping toward chaos. The change in her was profound. The unassuming civilian had vanished, replaced by something else entirely. Her posture straightened, her shoulders squared, and an aura of command, of absolute, unshakable authority, descended upon her like a mantle. It was a presence so powerful it had its own gravitational field, and one by one, the patrons of the diner fell silent, their own conversations dying as they found themselves drawn to the quiet drama unfolding in the corner. She began to speak, and her voice was the most shocking thing of all. It was the same quiet, measured voice, but now it was imbued with a tone of pure, undiluted command. It was a voice that did not request or suggest. It stated, ordered, shaped reality. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question, a voice that carried the weight of immense responsibility. And the words she spoke were a foreign language of expertise, a litany of technical jargon and strategic imperatives that silenced the amateurish speculation of the construction workers. "This is Phoenix 1, she said, her voice a calm, clear signal in the growing storm of panic. "Authenticate Charlie Delta 792. I am invoking Section 1131 Emergency Authority. Acknowledge." There was a pause, a brief crackle of static audible even from across the room. Then she continued, her words painting a vivid picture of high-stakes crisis management. "Deploy the Rapid Response Engineering Team from Sector 4 to the site. I need real-time structural analysis of the remaining supports. Ground all air traffic within a 3-mile radius, we're going to need that airspace for medical helicopters. Coordinate with the Coast Guard for river recovery operations. Do not, I repeat, do not attempt vehicle extraction until we've assessed secondary collapse risk." Her eyes were distant, focused on a mental map no one else could see. She was visualizing the entire disaster space, moving emergency teams and resources like pieces on a strategic board. Derek and his crew stood frozen, their mouths slightly agape. The tactical solutions they had been shouting just moments before now seemed like the naive suggestions of amateurs. This woman was speaking a language of command they had only ever read about in training materials. She wasn't quoting procedure. She was writing it in real time, with dozens of lives hanging in the balance. "Tell the incident commander to establish a safe perimeter at 500 feet. I'm seeing load-bearing cracks in the eastern support column. If that goes, we'll have a complete span failure. Evacuate the south approach immediately." She listened for a moment, then spoke again, her voice dropping even lower, becoming more precise. "Divert emergency power to the pump stations. That water level is rising, and we have people trapped in vehicles. I need dive teams deployed within the next 7 minutes, not 10. And get me the chief structural engineer who signed off on this project. I have questions." A collective sharp intake of breath swept through the diner. The implication was clear and terrifying, this wasn't just a rescue operation. This was a criminal investigation in motion. Someone was responsible, and she was already assembling the case. She wasn't just managing a disaster. She was managing multiple crises simultaneously, her mind a supercomputer processing data, probabilities, and decisive action. The diner was now utterly, deathly silent. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator units, the frantic voice of the reporter on the television, and the calm, authoritative voice of the woman in the Navy windbreaker. The contrast was dizzying. On the screen, chaos reigned. In the corner of the diner, absolute control presided. The onlookers, from the waitress to the youngest apprentice, were witnessing a masterclass in crisis leadership. They were seeing what true competence looked like, stripped bare of titles, credentials, and ceremony. It was not about shouting or posturing. It was about a clear mind, a steady hand, and the courage to make impossible decisions in the face of overwhelming odds. Derek felt a cold dread seeping into his bones. The woman he had insulted, the woman he had pushed, was not just some random civilian. She was a commander. The realization dawned on him not as a single thought, but as a slow, creeping horror. Every detail clicked into place, her unnerving calm, her analytical gaze, her refusal to be provoked. It wasn't weakness. It was discipline. It was the complete and total self-control of a professional who operated on a plane of existence he couldn't even begin to comprehend. He had not just insulted a woman. He had assaulted a federal official. The magnitude of his transgression began to crash down upon him with the force of the very disaster she was now managing with her words. The door of the diner burst open with a force that made everyone jump. 2 uniformed state troopers, faces grim and set for trouble, stormed in. Behind them, moving with deliberate, heavy authority, was Regional Director Marcus Thornton of the Department of Labor's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, a man whose mere presence could shut down entire construction sites. Thornton was a legend in the industry, a figure of immense and immediate respect. He had received a frantic call from the waitress about a worker harassing a customer, but the call had been interrupted by the emergency alert. Now he was here to restore order, his eyes scanning the room, expecting to find violence in progress. Instead, he found a scene of bizarre suspended animation. The diner was packed with workers, but they were all silent, their attention fixed on a back corner. He saw the source of their fascination, a woman in civilian clothes, speaking calmly into a satellite phone. He saw Derek, pale and sweating, looking like a man who had just seen his future collapse. Thornton's brow furrowed in confusion. This was not the scene he had expected. He started to move forward, his voice ready to boom out a command to disperse. But then he caught the cadence of the woman's voice. He heard the words she was using. "Negative, Commander," she was saying, her tone firm but not harsh. "Do not allow media access to the collapse site until we've completed the preliminary investigation. This is a federal crime scene as of now. Secure it." Phoenix won out. The call sign hit Marcus Thornton like a physical blow. It was a code designation he had heard only twice before, both times in classified emergency management briefings. It was a designation reserved for a single person, a presidential appointee with sweeping emergency powers. It was a name that carried with it the full weight and authority of the federal government. His professional training took over, overriding his confusion. He slowed his approach, his eyes narrowing, studying her. He didn't recognize her face immediately, but he recognized the mantle of command she wore so effortlessly. He saw the straightness of her spine, the absolute focus in her eyes. He saw the way her left hand, the one not holding the phone, was resting against the wall, not clenched in stress, but open, relaxed, a picture of a mind in total control of chaos. He stopped a respectful distance away. He did not shout. He did not interrupt. He simply stood and waited. He had been in crisis management for 25 years, and he knew a commanding presence when he saw one, regardless of uniform or credentials. He recognized the species. When she finally clicked the phone off and lowered it, the silence in the room became absolute. She took a slow, deliberate breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly, the immense weight of command lifting for a moment. Then she looked up, and her eyes met his. Thornton took a single, precise step forward. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a low, respectful rumble. "Marcus Thornton, OSHA Regional Director. Forgive the intrusion." He paused, then asked the question using a formal verification phrase. "I'm required to confirm, do you have operational status on Cascade Protocol?" Her response was immediate, crisp, and correct. "Cascade Protocol is active. Primary disaster response is underway. Riverside Bridge has been secured. Secondary collapse has been prevented. We have 12 confirmed survivors extracted from vehicles. The situation is stabilizing." Her use of the word "we" was telling. She wasn't an observer. She was the commander. Thornton's entire demeanor shifted. He straightened his back until it was ramrod straight. He looked past her at the entire room of stunned workers, and his voice exploded with a power that rattled the salt shakers on the tables. "Everyone on your feet. Now." The command was instinctual, primal. Every single worker in that diner, from the newest apprentice to the most experienced foreman, stood up immediately. Chairs scraped, boots hit the floor. And in less than a second, the entire room was standing at attention, their eyes locked forward, faces pale with dawning realization. Derek, who had been swaying slightly, jolted as if struck by electricity, his body snapping upright so violently it was a miracle he didn't topple over. The silence that followed was more profound than any before it. It was a silence of shock, of comprehension, and of absolute, unconditional respect. Marcus Thornton then turned back to the woman in the Navy windbreaker. He extended his hand in a gesture of profound professional respect. "Dr. Chen, ma'am," he said, his voice now filled with a mixture of awe and professional formality. "We were not aware you were in the region. My apologies for the disturbance." The name and the title descended upon the room like a detonation. Dr. Sarah Chen. Not a supervisor. Not a manager. The director of the National Transportation Safety Board, a position so powerful, so rare, that most workers go their entire careers without ever meeting someone at that level. The title echoed in the stunned silence, each syllable a hammer blow to the foundation of Derek's reality. He had pushed a federal director. He had told the woman who commanded nationwide transportation safety investigations to run along home. The sheer cosmic stupidity of his actions threatened to buckle his knees. The narrator's voice seems to step in, a disembodied authority cataloging the truth now laid bare. Director, National Transportation Safety Board. Ph.D. in Structural Engineering, MIT. Licensed professional engineer in 17 states. Lead investigator, over 200 major accident investigations. Commendations, Presidential Citizens Medal, National Medal of Technology and Innovation. Security clearance, top secret/SCI. She was not just a director. She was a legend. A scholar investigator who had graduated summa cum laude from Caltech, conducted groundbreaking research on materials failure, personally investigated the collapse of 3 major bridges, 2 dam failures, and countless aviation disasters. She was Sarah Phoenix Chen, a name whispered with reverence by engineers and with apprehension by negligent contractors. She acknowledged Thornton's greeting with a brief, efficient nod. "At ease, Director Thornton," she said, her voice once again calm and quiet. "And everyone else, please sit down." A collective exhale swept the room as the workers slowly returned to their seats, though they remained tense, their eyes wide with disbelief and awe. Dr. Chen then let her gaze drift across the room until it settled on Derek. Her eyes were not angry. They were not accusatory. They were worse. They were disappointed. It was the look of a leader who had been let down, not personally, but professionally. It was the look of someone who saw a systemic failure, a flaw in the culture that needed correction. "Derek," she said, and her quiet voice seemed to fill every corner of the diner. "You had something you wanted to say to me?" Derek could not speak. His throat had become a desert of pure terror. He could only shake his head, a tiny, pathetic movement. "I believe," she continued, her voice level and devoid of emotion, "your words were that a woman had no business being here alone. Is that correct?" Derek's face, which had been pale, now turned a blotchy, mortified red. He managed to stammer out a single word. "Ma'am." "I am not your ma'am in this context," she corrected her voice cutting like surgical steel. "Right now, I am the woman you believed had no business here. I am the woman you felt entitled to touch. I am the assumption you made. And I am the reality you failed to see. Your error in judgment tonight was not just a personal failing. It was a professional one. You failed to assess a situation. You failed to recognize competence when it was sitting 3 feet away from you. You saw gender, not credentials. You saw surface, not substance. In my world, Derek, an assumption like that can cause bridges to collapse. It can cause planes to crash. It can kill people. Because if you can't recognize expertise when it's right in front of you, you can't learn from it. And in this industry, the moment you stop learning is the moment people start dying. Each word was a perfectly placed incision, dismantling his arrogance, his prejudice, his entire sense of self. She wasn't just reprimanding him. She was teaching him, deconstructing his failure with the cold, precise logic of an engineer identifying structural weakness. Director Thornton stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'll take him into custody. He'll be reported to his employer and face appropriate disciplinary action." Dr. Chen held up a hand. "No, Director. That would be too easy. Punishment doesn't create change. Education does. Derek is going to report to my field office at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. He's assigned to my investigation team for the duration of the Riverside Bridge inquiry. He'll carry equipment. He'll take notes. He'll learn the names of every victim. He'll understand that competence, expertise, and authority have no gender. He'll learn that in this field, respect isn't given based on appearance, it's earned through knowledge, skill, and integrity. Am I understood?" Derek could only nod, his eyes locked on the floor, the weight of her words a physical burden. He understood. He finally, truly understood. The story of the director and the foreman spread through the construction industry like wildfire, through union halls, job sites, and industry conferences. It was told in break rooms during lunch, in safety meetings before shifts, and in engineering classrooms at universities. Each telling embellished some details, but the core remained, a powerful lesson about assumptions and respect. In some versions, the director personally rescued trapped victims from the collapsed bridge. In others, she identified the structural flaw that caused the collapse with a single glance. The truth, as is often the case, was quieter, more profound, and far more powerful. It was the story of a woman whose quiet competence had so thoroughly and completely dismantled a man's loud arrogance that it had recalibrated his entire worldview. Derek, as promised, reported to her office at 7 a.m. the next day. The first week was a blur of humiliation and enlightenment. He stood in the background at the disaster site, a silent witness to a world he never knew existed. He watched her conduct briefings with federal officials, coordinate with state emergency management, and personally interview survivors. He saw the immense, crushing weight of the decisions she made every single day, decisions that affected public safety and the integrity of the nation's infrastructure. He carried her equipment case, which felt heavier than any toolbox he'd ever lifted, weighted as it was with precision instruments that could determine the fate of entire projects. He learned the names of the victims, but more than that, he learned their stories. He watched as she met with grieving families, her compassion as genuine and as deep as her technical expertise was absolute. His arrogance was sandblasted away, layer by painful layer, replaced by a deep, humbling, and transformative respect. He stopped seeing her as a female director. He started seeing her as his director, a leader whose expertise and integrity he aspired to emulate. He began to understand that her silence in the diner was not passivity. It was the practiced discipline of a professional who conserves their energy for the battles that matter. Her calm was not weakness. It was the bedrock of strength upon which entire systems of public safety depended. He was not just punished. He was transformed. The diner, now unofficially nicknamed Phoenix Point by the locals, spoke of that night in hushed tones. The booth where she had sat was informally reserved, a silent monument to the lesson learned there. The owner eventually placed a small plaque on the wall nearby, engraved with a quote attributed to her from a commencement speech: "Assumptions are the foundation of failure. Evidence is the architecture of truth." The story became a teaching tool, a cautionary tale for new workers entering the industry. Senior project managers would tell it to their young, overconfident engineers to remind them that credentials and expertise don't always come with fanfare, and that respect is a currency that must be offered to everyone, regardless of their appearance. The legend of that night was not about the public shaming of a foolish foreman. It was about the quiet, irrefutable power of demonstrated competence. It was a testament to the idea that true authority is not demanded but earned, and it is earned by those who prove their worth through expertise and action, not volume and posturing. The ripple effect of her quiet professionalism spread subtly, changing the culture, reinforcing the highest ideals of the profession. Years passed. The incident at Phoenix Point became a cornerstone of professional development training in engineering schools and construction management programs. It was a case study in bias recognition, crisis management, and the critical importance of challenging one's own assumptions. Dr. Sarah Chen continued her distinguished career, eventually becoming the first woman to serve as Under-Secretary of Transportation for Policy. Her calm demeanor and analytical brilliance guided the nation's transportation infrastructure through a period of unprecedented modernization and safety improvement. She never spoke of that night in the diner publicly. She didn't need to. The lesson had taken on a life of its own, becoming part of the professional DNA of the industry she served. Her legacy was not in the single event, but in the thousands of better professionals it created. And Derek, he was no longer a foreman. Project manager Derek Lawson stood before a group of newly hired construction workers, their faces young, eager, and full of the same unearned confidence he once possessed. He was now a respected safety officer for a major infrastructure firm, known for his exacting standards but also for his profound wisdom and empathy. He was telling them a story. "Let me tell you about the biggest mistake I ever made," he began, his voice steady and sure. "It was a mistake that saved my career, my integrity, and quite possibly my life. It was the day I learned that the most dangerous assumption you can make is thinking you know who the smartest person in the room is based on what they look like." He told them the story of the diner, of his own foolish pride, and of the director who commanded a nationwide emergency response with a quiet voice from a payphone alcove. He didn't spare himself in the telling. He laid his own ignorance and prejudice bare for them to see, offering his own humiliation as a shield to protect them from making the same mistake. "Your tool belt doesn't make you competent," he told them, his gaze sweeping over the young faces. "Your certification doesn't make you wise. Your years on the job don't make you right. What makes you valuable is your willingness to recognize expertise wherever you find it, to learn from whoever has knowledge to share, and to treat every person you meet with the baseline respect that acknowledges their potential to teach you something crucial." A young worker, bold and curious, raised his hand. "What happened with Dr. Chen after that? Did you ever work with her again?" Derek allowed a small, genuine smile to touch his lips. "She made me a better professional," he said simply. "She taught me that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the clearest thinker. And sometimes that means showing a foolish young foreman the difference between confidence and competence." He saw the understanding dawning in their eyes, and he knew the lesson had been passed on. The legacy of that night was not a plaque on a wall or a story in a book. It was woven into the character of the next generation of professionals, a legacy of quiet competence, of earned respect, and of the profound truth that the strongest leaders are not the ones who make the most noise, but the ones whose silence carries the weight of expertise and integrity. The quiet professionalism Dr. Chen demonstrated that evening became a philosophy, a creed passed down through the profession. It was a way of being that championed substance over style, evidence over opinion, and humility over hubris. Her legacy was not carved in monuments, but embedded in the daily practices of the people she influenced. It was present in the engineer who triple-checked calculations without needing praise. It was present in the inspector who calmly halted unsafe work without raising their voice. It was present in the young supervisor who listened to the concerns of the newest apprentice, knowing that safety insights can come from anyone. The story taught a generation of professionals that true expertise is an internal quality, a core of knowledge and skill forged through years of study, experience, and dedication that requires no external validation. It was the understanding that credentials and titles are symbols of responsibility, not licenses for arrogance. They are reminders of standards to be maintained, duties to be fulfilled, trust to be honored. The world is full of noise, of people demanding attention, proclaiming their own importance, shouting to be heard above the crowd. But true worth is proven in the quiet crucible of crisis. It is revealed in the steady analysis that identifies the root cause, in the calm voice that brings order to chaos, in the clear thinking that sees truth while others are blinded by their own biases. The lesson of Dr. Sarah Chen was a timeless one: let your knowledge be your argument. Let your competence be your credential. The respect that follows will be genuine, earned, and enduring. Her single quiet act of crisis management in a roadside diner had a more lasting impact on professional culture than a dozen keynote speeches, because it was real. It was a demonstration, not a declaration. It showed them that the highest form of authority is the authority that is so confident in itself, it feels no need to broadcast it. It is the power of the quiet expert, the silent professional, the leader who is defined not by the volume of their voice but by the clarity of their vision and the precision of their actions. This principle extends far beyond engineering and construction. It is a universal truth for anyone who seeks to lead, to create, to build summit. Of lasting value. In medicine, it is the quiet surgeon whose meticulous technique saves lives without fanfare. In education, it is the dedicated teacher whose patient guidance transforms struggling students into confident learners. In law, it is the thorough attorney whose careful preparation wins cases without theatrical displays. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in words or titles. It's what continues forward in the actions and values of others. It is the standard you set, the example you live, the quiet competence that inspires those around you to be better, to think more carefully, to listen more openly. Dr. Chen never sought to become a legend. She simply sought to fulfill her duties to the best of her considerable abilities. In doing so, she became one. Her story serves as a permanent reminder that character, expertise, and integrity are the true measures of a person, and that the most profound impact is often made by those who work quietly, think clearly, and let their results speak for themselves. The world will always have its share of directs, loud, insecure, quick to judge based on surface appearances. But they are no match for the quiet strength of a Dr. Chen, a strength that is calm, knowledgeable, and utterly, unshakably professional. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, where character defines worth, and where true expertise speaks louder than any boast, subscribe to The Final Watch. These stories matter, and your support helps us continue sharing them.